So one of the questions that I got early on for you was fairly specific. I'll start with that one. The person says, I'm a second year master's student majoring in chemistry. Do you think I can find a job in the food industry field?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. There's a lot of chemistry in food science. It's really chemistry, biology, and chemistry and microbiology are really huge areas in food science. So having a background in chemistry, a master's in chemistry, you can absolutely get a food science position in industry if you don't have any specific knowledge of food, because yeah, it's really, you would just you can apply your chemistry knowledge to food pretty easily. So yeah.
Okay. This is also another question, kind of like related to grad school. There's two questions related to that. One person, and you might have covered this in your presentation, but maybe you could review for us. The person said, what kinds of educational requirements are there for research careers in food systems? And do you feel like you have to have a PhD, or is a master's degree sufficient?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think actually the majority of people that are researchers in this area only have master's degrees. I mean, a PhD, I mean, if you want to do a PhD, but it's definitely not necessary to do, I think, the majority of food systems research.
Okay. Another question I have is sometimes students, they've lived all their life in one place and Tufts has been their first place, outside of where they're from. And you mentioned that you moved to the West Coast. And I'm just wondering, what advice do you have for people? This is kind of two questions in this, but what advice do you have for people who are, thinking about graduate school in a state that they've never been in before? Like, do you advise that they move there and get a job and then work for a little bit and go to grad school, or, just jump in and go to grad school in another state? What kind of helped you get through that transition?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, for me personally, I don't think, I mean, unless like for University of California or like a state school or like UNC or something, you would get in-state tuition right away if you lived there for a year. So that's a financial thing you could think about. But I wouldn't say you definitely need to live there for a year. I mean, I lived for a year in San Francisco before I ended up at Davis, but that's because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was still exploring. I think grad school really gives you a strong community. I actually think moving and having a job is a little bit harder than moving to go to a grad program, because when you're going to a grad program, it's like, it's like starting college again. Everybody's new. It's easier to form, in my experience, a community when you move for grad school versus moving for a job.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for the in-state tuition tip as well. That makes sense. All right, this one is not related to grad school, but more the role that you've taken so far. One question was, what do you feel is the role of data-driven decision-making in working towards a sustainable food systems network?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think data-driven, evidence-based research is very important. I think the thing about data that is, there's so much potential with data, but I also think it's very, if that core data is flawed, and then we use it in all of these different algorithms and things, that's where the problem happens. So I think it's a really interesting area, but assuming, basically just getting the highest quality data, like as a researcher, is imperative to make good data-driven policy decisions. But it's definitely, it plays a huge role in it. The other thing I might say is I do think, there is some impact of, it's important to like talk to people and talk to communities. Data to me, can only take us so far to make really good policy decisions. So I think having input from the communities before you make that kind of decision is important, but definitely data plays a huge role.
We have a couple more minutes for a couple, well, maybe three more questions. So I just want to encourage people, if you do have a question, to put that in the chat, and Robin will ask it, or if you want to turn your camera on, and wave, that can work too. I just want to ask one last question before we kind of open it to see if anybody else has questions. And you talked about the value of networking. So I just want to remind people that in the chat, I put one of the resources that Emily talked about, which is the Herd, which is open to any student. You just have to create a profile and use it. We also have an instructional video. So at the end of today's session, I will email all attendees, some advice on that. But one question that came in is, what networking steps would you suggest a Tufts student do to enter your field and the greater field? Do you suggest that they start with maybe a Tufts alum from Friedman, reach out to people on LinkedIn? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, any or all of the above. I mean, I think anything where, just as an undergraduate, I'd be just taking an active role in networking at all, I think gives you a significant advantage when you start going out into the world. I don't think I started networking enough until grad school. The Herd is great. I've been mentoring people on the Herd for the past year. I've talked to quite a few students about this already, about this field. I use LinkedIn pretty actively. I think a good place to start is, definitely a good place to start would be Tufts alums in food, anywhere in the food systems realm. There's definitely people that have undergraduate degrees from Tufts that didn't go to Friedman that are also in this area. But Friedman, absolutely. I mean, if you see somebody that has a master's from the Tufts Friedman School, they would definitely be pretty knowledgeable about this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. This is my one last question. So again, if there's questions from the floor, let us know. And Willa just sent me a message that we still have the 2 p.m. slot with Emily open. So feel free to direct message Willa. Willa, you can even put your email or my email in the chat, and we can get you guys set up for that. A question that I have often about, graduate school is kind of like networking with people in the graduate program before you get in. Is that something that you would recommend, for, Friedman, or even for, a graduate program at UC Davis? Like, how do you suggest that people leverage connections with either researchers or postdocs, graduate students in the school that they're planning to apply to?
Yeah, again, I mean, a significant, any significant effort to do so, I think is always good. I'll just give you some specific examples about how I did it. I do feel like that's, one of my strengths. I was able to do that. As an undergraduate, I cross-registered in a course at Friedman. So I assume that's still available for you guys to do. So as a junior, I cross-registered in a course about antioxidants and human health. And, just doing that made me stand out when I was applying to Friedman, because I had already shown interest and connected with some faculty members there. So that's, if you're a Tufts undergrad and you're interested in Friedman, that's an easy thing to do. If that's still an option, I would assume so. PhD programs, I think, are different than master's programs. And also they're really different. I mean, but in both cases, if it's a research master's or a research PhD program, you want to think about which advisor, which advisor you'd want to do research under. And, sometimes you don't get to pick, so you should definitely have, at least 5 different maybe 5 to 10 different research advisors that you find interesting at a particular school. And, you know, some of them are not willing to talk to you in advance. I mean, it's nothing against you, but it never hurts to ask if they'd be willing to just chat about the research they do. I would say advice for that type of conversation, you know, it really looks good, you know, just if you've done, basically if you've prepared, if you've done research on their research, and that will help them have a positive impression of you if you have like read some of their papers and, you know, have insightful questions.
Thank you. So I just opened up my Zoom window and I see that Sharu and Madeline, you have your videos on. So I just wanted to check. Did you have a question that you want to ask before we finish?
I was just going to ask, in terms of grad school, I know this differs from person to person, but if you're getting a more technical undergrad degree like computer science or chemistry, how would you suggest jumping into the field of food systems? Because like it's kind of hard to get experience if you don't have like anything to do with that in your undergrad.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, well, I mean, what worked for me was volunteer work. I mean, that's what I did. I guess that's how I kind of started getting into it. I worked at, you know, just did volunteer work at food nonprofits around healthy food access and, you know, sustainable agriculture. And that worked for me. I mean, I think there are other ways. You know, any sort of internship experience or research experience, even if it's short term or part time, is beneficial. I also, just in my experience, I do think, I don't want to make a broad statement, but I do think that in most cases, if you have a more of a technical background, it's easier to transition into a less technical background than vice versa. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I mean, there's lots of need for, you know, data science and computer science and, you know, more technical backgrounds in certain areas of this work.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
And then Madeline, last question, if you have one. Do you have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am a freshman, so like very early into undergrad, and I'm not exactly sure kind of what I'm gonna go into yet. Currently, I'm on track to be a chemistry major, but you know, we'll see. And I was gonna ask about kind of if you had advice about, you know, figuring out what sorts of research opportunities or internships might be interesting and like a good and worthwhile of time and energy. And you've outlined a lot of really good resources. So I guess just any kind of closing thoughts about that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, figuring out which opportunities are good. I mean, honestly, in my experience, you know, just jumping into one thing, you know, you're not necessarily going to know what you like right away. And I think for me, just do something you think you like, and then just really reflect on what you think you might like, and then really reflect on all of the things that, you know, what were you doing daily that you liked? What were the things that you were doing daily that you didn't like? What did you feel like you were using your strengths in that position? You always want to, people usually are happier when they're using their strengths in the work that they do. So I don't know, that was my approach. I mean, you can definitely do research and talk to people to figure out if an opportunity is the right one for you. But honestly, I feel like I learned more by doing something that I like kind of liked, thought I would like, and didn't actually like as much as I thought, and then really reflecting on what I liked and what I didn't like, so that the next position would be something that would be more aligned. Does that make sense?
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, again, on behalf of the Tufts Career Center and the larger Tufts community, I'd like to thank our professional resident speaker, Emily Steliotes, for joining us today. If you did not get a chance to sign up for a one-on-one career conversation, remember that our speaker mentioned that she's in the herd. If you just Google Tufts herd, that will bring you to the website, but I will be sharing advice on career conversations and other resources and this video with anybody who's attended today. So with that said, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.